The halacha begins that a person has to prepare for Seder the day before. Already before Erev Pesach, we're preparing for Seder. And I'm not speaking about the B'dika. Last week we spoke a little bit about searching for the chametz. That's is not a perfunctory search, but you really have to look. Any place where there was chametz, you have to look with a candle or with a flashlight. But one should search for the chametz. But the preparing for the Seder starts in another way the day before. In terms of the food that we eat. That means if the first Seder is Wednesday night, then the afternoon before the Seder is Wednesday afternoon. And you got everyone following that so far? You got it? Already from, we stop eating chametz in the morning about 10 to 11, right? 10 to 11, 10:50 is the time that we stop eating chametz. At that point, all of the chametz that you have not consumed, you gather up, and you burn within the next hour and 10 minutes, you burn that chametz, as well with any other chametz you might still have in your possession. Any chametz that you've sold, now, again, I'm available every evening at 7:30, or in the mornings after davening, or if you want even after this class, I have my contracts here, and my attorney is represented. So I will I'd be happy to fill out and show you how to fill out the documentation that gives me the power of attorney over all the chametz that you own, as well as the control of your mortgage, your children, and it's exclusive to the chametz.
Yes.
Right. Oh, correct. But all of the chametz that you've sold, that just stays in a closet. That just remains, and that's put away. Any chametz you still have out, that you just put in those of you who have a fireplace, just put in the fireplace and light it up. Then gather the ashes and dump them out. However, there's another halacha that we don't eat those things that are part of the center of the Seder. For example, anything with matzah meal, we don't eat Erev Pesach, in order that the taste of matzah, should be fresh in our mouths. So that means even things that have matzah meal, cookies, cakes, and other things that have matzah meal, you cannot eat Erev Pesach, which kind of limits your diet, exclusively to macaroons and apple juice. No, you can eat anything. What?
Even potatoes. That's what we use.
If you use potatoes, you should eat potatoes. Right?
Isn't there custom or law
Yes, there
about
is.
eating
Some people start already from Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Some people have started already from last week not eating matzah. It's not my particular custom, but there are people who have started all the way from Rosh Chodesh not eating matzah. But we don't eat matzah on Wednesday morning. And beginning in the afternoon, about 4:56, 5 o'clock, which is getting close to the time of Seder, by the later part of Mincha, already we don't really eat any major meal. Snack. It's important to snack because it's although we're supposed to come into the Seder hungry, you don't want to come into the Seder famished, because then you have a tendency to have the alcohol have a stronger effect and stronger impact on you, go straight into your brain. So it's better I always try to make it a habit to have a lot of milk prior to the Seder, before going to shul, because that really takes away from the impact on the alcohol. And there is a mitzvah of having wine specifically, of having a red wine. It can be a light red wine. There's a mitzvah of having a red wine for the Seder and not to use grape juice. If you can't handle alcohol at all, right, there are people who can't, then you could dilute it. And if you really can't even handle the diluted grape juice and alcohol, then you can have pure grape juice. If it really makes you sick and you won't be around the Seder, then you don't have to have the wine altogether, just have the grape juice. If you're allergic to grape juice, then see me afterwards. And if you're allergic to grapes, then you have a religious conflict, and there are ways to work that out also. Okay. So we have a preparation for the Pesach, that everything that we're going to eat during the Seder, that's new to us, that's fresh to us, and the Erev Yom Tov, we don't eat it. Also, the table should be set prior to the beginning of Yom Tov. Everything should be set out, and one should use their best finery, the nicest utensils, nicest silver, and other things that you have available for Pesach. There are women who tell me that they go out and they buy very expensive paper plates and chanettes and other things. They're in the other place. That people go out and buy all types of plasticware for Pesach, for the Seder. Really, la halacha, one should use the finest things they have, silverware, and the real things. However, if it's something that the women will be so upset because they're not going to be able to have a Yom Tov and there's so much to clean up, or you won't have enough, or you'll be embarrassed, or whatever it is, then of course, if you have no other option, then you could use the finest type of plasticware that you have available. But really, it's a Yom Tov meal, and it's not a Yom Tov meal only, it's a Yom Tov meal par excellence. And the symbol of freedom and luxury, that's the time we really take out our good stuff as a symbol of luxury, as a symbol of freedom and redemption and wealth. That's part and parcel of the Seder. So all of those play a role within the Seder. Also, it's important, we spoke about a little bit last week, to have some means to entertain the children, that the children should be entertained. Right? And Ricky's coming home. You have to make sure he's happy at the Seder.
Tammy's coming.
Tammy's also, so you have the real children can have the grandchildren, Anna Claus. That you should have colored Haggadot, picture books, story books about Mitzrayim, about the Jewish people going from Mitzrayim. Make sure it's our religion that published them, because they have different versions of the story. But it's very important to try to entertain the children as much as possible and try to demonstrate to them what happened. The Sephardim have a very interesting minhag. The Sephardim have a minhag, they have a custom, the Oriental Jews have a custom of taking, when they hide the afikomen, when they first take the afikomen and break the matzah, they have a custom of putting it in a pouch, and then standing up and taking that pouch and putting it on their shoulders, and walking out. And the kids ask, where are you going? And they said, we're going out of Egypt. We're going to Geula. We're going to redemption. Hashem called us, and Hashem said we have to go to Geula. And the kid starts yelling, Mom, Dad's flipped out, But if it becomes, to dramatize it, is very much a part and parcel of the Seder. And if you don't have that particular custom, there's an old Sephardic custom when it comes to the discussion of Kriyat Yam Suf, the splitting of the sea, that they pour some water on the floor, not on the carpet preferably. They pour some water on the floor and they jump over it to demonstrate the Kriyat Yam Suf. But this is, right? Do they do that in Morocco?
No, for parts of the thing, we do it. With the Kriyat Yam Suf,
Not the Kriyat Yam Suf.
Still
Okay.
a water. Still a water.
So we have
Who does it?
My father, I think, did it.
Really?
Yeah.
In Hungary?
with Makot, I don't know. There's something different with Makot. Take a play of mine and stone.
Mm-hmm.
10 stone, we put one inside, we pour the stone in it.
Well, we'll talk about that in a few moments. So there are different customs, but what I'm trying to explain to you, or perhaps to show you, it's that it's important to make this Seder as an exciting event as possible. Now that can be very difficult because you want to read through the Haggadah, right? You want to read the words of the Haggadah, and of course if you don't have a great deal of understanding in all the details, it can seem bogged down, it can seem rather detailed and difficult, the very essence, the very words of the Haggadah. However, those parts that you feel comfortable with explaining, and as I suggested to you that you should go spend an hour or two on Shabbos HaGadol, which is this Shabbos. It's the Shabbos before Pesach, is always called Shabbat HaGadol. To spend some time looking over the Haggadah, and after Shabbat, making a few notes to yourself, a few things scattered throughout the Haggadah that you could point out. I think it's important to make the Haggadah as relevant to people's understanding today. And there's a principle that we have in the Bible, Chanoch Lina al pi darko. You educate a person according to where they're at. And it's very important. I know, for example, when we came back from the Soviet Union, when my wife and I came back from the Soviet Union, it made the Seder, added a certain edge to the Seder. Things are very different now in the Soviet Union, even though it's only 2 years difference from the time we went. But just having a significant idea of what it was like, and the promise of redemption, and the people's mesirat nefesh, the people's heroism and dedication, and looking forwards to redemption, really emphasizes this. And there are many, many groups of Jews today that we should emphasize during the Seder, that we should speak to our children about during the Seder. Whether they be Soviet Jews, or whether they be Ethiopian Jews, or the Jewish community that's stuck in Syria, literally held captive, and all over the world, there are endangered Jewish populations. And we have a tendency that when we forget them, we become one. So it's very important to try to bring home the concept of the Haggadah as a statement of redemption now. Because one of the things we pointed out in our discussion last week and last Wednesday, our discussion about the Haggadah itself, not just the details of the Haggadah, but the philosophy of the Haggadah, one of the things that we discussed is that the Haggadah is clearly divided up into two themes. Are you going to jump over that? Demonstrate, okay. That the Haggadah is divided up into two themes. Prior to the meal, the Haggadah emphasizes what? It emphasizes the redemption of the Jews from Egypt. After the meal, remember we discussed how the Hallel, the praises of God, are divided up into two parts. There's a Hallel before the meal. It's the only time we break up Hallel, and it's an important thing to point out. This is an important tidbit to tell to people who are participating at your Seder. We begin before the meal, we begin with Hallel, right? The very famous praises of God referred to as the Hallel. And we stop after two paragraphs. But the Hallel that we say prior to the meal is B'tzeit Yisrael miMitzrayim, describing the Jewish people's exodus from Egypt. Then we stop in the middle of the Hallel. Literally in the middle of the Hallel, we stop and we have our meal. Time out. And then, after the meal, you conclude the Hallel. But what do you conclude it with? You conclude it after the meal is over. There's a part of the Haggadah where we get up, open up the door. Prior to doing that, we pour the fifth cup, right? And that cup sits in a very prominent place at the table, the fifth cup, unpoured until this time. Then the fifth cup is poured. And I say the fifth cup, I mean, we drink 4 cups. There's 1 cup that's set aside with a special cup, usually an attractive Kiddush cup, and that's the cup for Eliyahu. That's the cup for Elijah. I remember once going, after pouring the cup as a child, going to the door in our apartment to open it up, and I came back, my father had poured off some of the wine, so he told me that Eliyahu came and he drank, this much from it. But I was the smarter kid than that. I was guarding the door. But at that point, the predominant theme becomes not what was, but what's going to be. And we emphasized in our shir about the philosophy of the Haggadah that the Haggadah, the Seder, represents a search. The Seder begins with questions. Why do you begin with questions? Because for a Jew to learn, for a Jew to grow, one has to question. If you don't question, you're not playing the game. You're just not thinking. Everybody has questions. Questions are healthy in Judaism. They're vibrant. They give us a sense of growth. If you don't question yourself, then you're not growing. And so the Haggadah begins with questions, and that's why the Haggadah says, Afilu kulanu nevonim, kulanu chachamim, kulanu yovdim at Torah, even if we'd all be sagely, even if we would know very, very well the whole Haggadah, and we were all alone by ourselves, we're obligated to sit and ask the questions. In other words, a person who has to have a Seder all by oneself is obligated to sit and ask the questions. Because without questions, there's never a search for answers. And that's why I believe also the preeminence of the Afikomen search. And you can tell this to people. It's not just a game for the children, for which they can secure another mutual fund. Right? In the old days, you used to ask for $1, Now you have to get either a CD at 9.85%, or whatever. Right. So it's not just a children's game, but it's an emphasis that this night we're searching for something. And that's really an important point to describe to the participants, that the Seder represents a search. And as we discussed last Wednesday night, that our ability to search is in Seder, is in order. Order, things in order, create a process of thought, process of growth. It's a ladder, like Jacob's ladder in his dream. You have to go from rung to rung. You can't reach for the top. You have to go step by step by step. As long as one's growing, there's Seder, there's order in one's life, there's a sense of focus, and a sense, therefore, of purpose. Throughout the Haggadah, as we've discussed last week, I just want to review a few of the halachot that we discussed last week before we go further. We have the Heseba. One is obligated to recline. And I told you that if you have a armchair, then it's easy, it's nice to put a pillow down there and to recline. Again, don't be too comfortable you can fall asleep, right, which is not the purpose of the Seder. It's always good to get a good night's sleep the night before, because by that time the house is already prepared for Pesach. And even if you have the opportunity to take a nap in the daytime, to prepare, really one should be a focus, and the children should take a nap in the daytime. It should be a focus of the Seder is a very special event. It seems a shame that the Seder's at night. You know, wouldn't it be so much easier if the Seder were in the daytime, and the kids would be up, and you'd be more up, you know, and you'd come home from shul and make the whole meal with the Seder, and you wouldn't have to worry about, oh gee, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Aren't you ready to make Kiddush yet? You know, yeah, or more. I mean,
then you lose the feeling in a way. You by having it this way, it's almost, you achieve this feeling that's inevitable by working hard and planning, and suddenly it's late and Pesach is here, and you feel tired, just like.
It's in a sense what you said is poetic, but correct. That there's a rational basis for what you said, and that is, there's a great deal of emphasis all throughout the Haggadah, and I want you to look for it when you're saying the Haggadah next week, right? Next week from tomorrow night. Hope everybody's ready, right? There's a lot of emphasis on night. It was in the middle of the night. Nighttime always represents for us suffering, galut, exile, trouble, difficulty, confrontation. And the Seder is a nighttime experience. That's when the Jews got their freedom, was in the middle of the night.
And all other nights, the night belongs to Niccolo.
This night belonged to Niccolo, right. But that was very profound anyway. A few good helps are interesting. But the nature of the night of Pesach is just that, peering through the night to find the daytime. Like we constantly mention Abraham being surrounded by darkness when he's shown Jewish history, the Brit Bein HaBetarim. When he's shown the history of the Jewish people, so at that moment, a very great darkness, a blackness, fell upon Avraham. And the trick that Avraham had to succeed within was the description of night. The Torah describes it, and the sun was yet to come. The ability to go through the night and to live through the night, to be able to get to the next day successfully, is the history of the Jewish people. Because for the Jewish people, after the night, there's always been a new arising, a new sun, a new day. You know, if you, what we discussed in the Parshat HaShavua class 2 weeks ago, you know, imagine the first night for the human being. Remember that? Imagine the first night for the human being, Adam and Rishon, right? Adam and Chava, they were just expelled from the Garden of Eden, and a great darkness fell on them because they had just sinned. And they figured, and God, what did God tell them? If you sin, if you eat from this, that's it, guys, you know. I hope you had a nice life, because you're going to die. And they're just 1 day old, right, both of them. And they're expelled from the garden. All of a sudden, the warmth of the sun begins to diminish, and the light of day ceases, and their eyes get heavy. And they figured, oh, well, that was very nice, but this is it. They figured they were dying. They didn't know. They didn't know night and day. And all day long they had light, they had heat, they had warmth, they were vibrant. Then towards the evening time, they grew very tired. Their limbs got very heavy. I don't know, that sounds almost hypnotic. You are going to... Although I don't even have to use one of these things in many of my classes. It works...
How long were they in the garden?
1 day. That was 1 day. 1 day they were there, they ate Eitzadas, that very same day on Yom Shishi, they sinned. They did not take long. The whole experience wasn't too long. Not much of a vacation, right? Right. What did you want? Paradise. And so they were expelled that night. And imagine that night, what that night represented to them. It was death. But then all of a sudden, the morning caressed their cheek, the sunlight, and they see a new day. So imagine that excitement of going through the new day. That really is a sum total of Jewish history. Of going through the night to be able to get to the day. And the more we can appreciate the day, the less chance the night has of having any dominion over us. I'm not leaving. Throughout the Seder, we recline, that's Heseba. And as I started to say, if you can do it with pillows, that's fine. Otherwise, the easiest thing to do is just turn your chair sideways like this and just to recline. And you must recline during the eating of matzah and during the drinking of wine. Those two things that if you don't recline during matzah and wine, you have to do it over again. And so
Until you get it right.
Right? Until you get it right. Cup 123. Yeah, you should recline, even a slight reclining. There's a controversy whether women are obligated to recline, but we say that women should recline also, especially during the matzah and during the cup. The only time that you don't recline is when you eat the bitter herbs. Okay, when you eat the bitter herbs, you don't recline. I'm going to speak a little bit about the bitter herbs in my Shabbos HaGodol drasha, Shabbos afternoon.
But when you eat the maror and the matzah?
Right, when you eat the sandwich, then you still recline. Then you do recline.
I thought that women didn't have to.
It's machloket. But we say that women should recline. That women should recline. Okay. There's a halacha that if you're in front of your Rav, in front of your teacher or your Rebbe or your rabbi, that you have to ask permission to recline. Right? Because it's a sign of acting in a casual manner. Right? There's another in the contract that we have with the shul that if I'm in front of the board of directors, I have to ask them permission to recline. No, I'm just joking. Okay. Whenever we have the brachot, we discussed last week that in the bracha of Kiddush, for example, it's most appropriate for the person who's leading the Seder to make the Kiddush, to make the bracha bari pri hagofen, to make the shechianu, and everyone answer amen and drink. Not that everyone should make their own bracha. That's preferable. That's really appropriate. Because we have a principle, v'rovam hadorat melech, that God is most glorified with a mitzvah that's done by a multitude of people together. So in all of the Seder, if the person has in mind to be motzi, then everyone should listen and just answer amen. A rule of thumb, some people have the custom, I don't know if you've heard it, in the middle of a bracha, the Sfardim especially do this a lot, to say Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo.
But only, not for, if we know that we be
Right.
only, but
Did anybody ever hear that? You cannot add any words in whatsoever if you're going to be fulfilling the mitzvah with that bracha. But you have to listen carefully and just answer amen. You can't answer anything else in the middle.
Before the bracha.
Before the bracha.
We use the L'chaim.
Right.
Are you meant to drink of the same wine from the same kos?
No. Then you drink, you use your own kos. Everyone should have their own cup. And let's look at the measurements here on the two sheets.
Does one obligated to drink the whole cup every time?
No, but let's talk about it. First of all, the 4 cups, it says 3.3 fluid ounces. On Friday night, the difference between Friday night and a Yom Tov night is that on a Friday night, it's Shabbat. On a Yom Tov night, it's not Shabbat. Okay? What's the difference? Shabbat, the mitzvah of Kiddush, is from the Torah. On the Yom Tov, it's not. Why not? Why is Yom Tov different from Shabbos?
Because we that's mitzvah v'moadim mitzvah.
Correct. Let me explain it. When it comes to Yom Tov, God cannot have a Yom Tov of Pesach without the Jewish people. We've mentioned this in the past. God can't have Pesach without us. Now, if we would say no, it wouldn't be. That's the mitzvah that we read about last week in Shul. The mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. God said you have to create the calendar and accept the months. If you don't accept the months, Any of the holidays that fall out on a particular date don't fall out. They're not there. That means we could eliminate Pesach, or Sukkot, or Shavuot, or Martin Luther King's birthday, just by eliminating the calendar, by eliminating our consecrating the calendar, which we do every month, or was done beforehand, whatever it is. We become a partner with God in sanctifying the day and the very creation of the day. How does that show itself up in the blessing of Shabbat versus the blessing of Yom Tov? Correct. When it comes to, this is old stuff. When it comes to the Shabbat, the blessing for Kiddush and the blessing in the prayer system is blessed is God who sanctifies the Sabbath. Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh haShabbat. Right? God sanctifies the Sabbath. When it comes to the Yom Tov, what do we say? Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. We thank God for sanctifying Israel and the festivals. Why do we put why do we put the Jewish nation into the blessing about Yom Tov but not into Shabbos? You hear the question. On Shabbos it says, blessed is God who sanctifies Shabbat. On Yom Tov it says, blessed is God who sanctifies the Jewish people and the Yom Tov. The question is, why do we put the word Yisrael into the Yom Tov? And the answer is because without the sanctity of the Jewish nation, there wouldn't be a Yom Tov. Because God said, you make the calendar, you make the month holy, and I'll tell you which day of the month it is. But you have to assign the month and its sanctity. You hear? So we're already sanctifying the month by its very incipience. By its very being, we've sanctified Pesach. Right? As soon as you go ahead and pick up a calendar from Spitzer's or Bornstein, that sanctifies them. Not really. This month is sanctified on the Rosh Chodesh. We say in Shul, we accept the coming month. Right? We announce the month, etc. Those, according to some, play a role in sanctifying the month and accepting the month. And we accept Rosh Chodesh, it gives it Kedusha. So when it comes to Kiddush on Yom Tov, that's only midrabanan. That's a rabbinical decree. And therefore the measure is not as stringent. We're not as stringent in assigning the measurement to it. So you can get by with 3.3 fluid ounces on the Seder, on a regular Yom Tov, but if it's Shabbat, then you need 4.42 fluid ounces. Now,
So if you have a cup that's like 6 ounces, you don't have to fill it to the top, do you?
Now, when you have a cup, normally on Shabbat, there's a statement from the Zohar that we should, kosir avoya, that our cup runneth over, we should have a full cup. However, as long on Shabbat and a normal Yom Tov, as long as you drink mole lugmov, which is like a cheek's full worth, like that. I could repeat it after class if you didn't see it and didn't catch it. But as long as you get mole lugmov, that's sufficient for normal Shabbat or festival. When it comes to Pesach, there's a specific halacha, there's a specific law of drinking the cup. So if you use a 12-ounce cup, you're going to drink a lot of wine. How much of the cup do you have to drink? For the first cup, and preferably for the last cup as well, you should drink the entire cup. But for the second and third cups, all you have to do is drink a majority of the cup. So if you're going to be drinking a majority, even though, let's say your cup is only 3.5 ounces, that's good enough to drink just a majority of the cup for the second and third cups.
So if we're using a 6-ounce cup, should be filled to the top for the first and second.
For all of them. No, for all of the cups you filled it up. And right. Because when it comes to Pesach, we view it in terms of the cup that you're using. So that's why I suggest to people, don't use such a big kos. Don't use such a big cup. As long as it has for the Seder, as long as it has 3.5 ounces, that's fine. And that's not really a very large cup at all, 3.5 ounces. Right? That's a small cup. It's not very, very small. Now you have to be careful of the really small ones. Here we use for our shot glasses, we use the doctor's measuring cups. People, they get all these extra supplies, yeah. Okay, that's the share of drinking the yayin. Let's look at the matzah and maror. Let's turn to the diagram on this paper. Does everybody have a good diagram on this here? Let's look to the sides. On the left-hand side, it says the maror, the leaves of maror. That's the entire area enclosed by the green. Okay? I hope that's very clear to everybody. Here it says blue. This is a different one.
By the gray, it's clear.
Okay. The entire area enclosed by the green, so that means the entire green here, which is the same as the gray on your chart, which is essentially the entire piece of paper. Right? Almost the entire piece of paper minus the little borders on the side. That's even preferable in the order of things. That's even preferable to the horseradish.
This area.
No, the whole thing. The whole thing. The leaves. What? Per person. Not per family, right.
So that's like 4 or 5.
That's about 3 medium-sized leaves. You cannot use Paul Newman salad dressing on it. Can't use it. Can't eat anything else with it. Matter of fact, you should be aware.
I thought you couldn't use romaine.
No. Romaine is preferable. The problem with romaine lettuce, though, is that it's buggy. So if you insist on using the leaves, you have a lot of work ahead of you. You have to soak it in salt water for a few hours. Then you what?
That long?
Yeah. Get it salted well till the the bugs knock over because of high blood pressure because of the sodium.
I thought you just wash them off. You can't just wash off.
Steve, you like that one? Okay. Figure that'd be right up your alley. Oh, okay. But it's really a pain in the neck because then you have to go leaf by leaf and rinse it out. Let me suggest to you what I do. Romaine lettuce is very cheap. Heads of romaine lettuce are very, very cheap. Buy a lot of them. Buy 7 or 8 of them, and cut off the leaves from the stalk. It's very quick to do that. You just pull it out. Cut off the. If you need me to do it for you, I'm very quick at romaine lettuce cutting. What?
I don't understand what you meant. For instance, you have like the heart of the romaine lettuce, right?
Right.
That's attached to the stalk. Then you have larger leaves. So what do you mean cut off from the stalk?
Okay. The stalk in every leaf, there's the leafy part, and then there's the center spine in every leaf. If you take a sharp knife and a cutting board, you can cut through one head in about 10 minutes maximum, and then.
And then you're just eating the stalk.
And you eat the stalk. Now, if you eat just the stalk, you put in enough stalks to fill in this box here. It says maror stalks. And that's much less. It seems like much less. It goes much faster because it's very soft, the romaine lettuce. And it's not like celery. It's not as hard as celery, the stalks. And you could just wrap them together and in a few bites just consume the whole thing. It's much easier to clean because then you don't have to bother washing off the whole leaf. There you just take every stalk, and rub and soak the stalks. But then when you just rinse it in water, it's very easy to wash off. The leaf, you have to really go through the whole leaf and rub the whole leaf. So the stalks are very easy to use, and I recommend them. Now, if you insist on using ground horseradish, that's a lot. Per serving is 1.1 fluid ounces. That's the bottom over here. That's your picture of ground horseradish. That's 1.1 fluid ounces, and that's quite a bit. That's quite a bit. So that's very hard to take. Many of us will have the ground horseradish in combination with the romaine lettuce in the sandwich, in the korach sandwich. Where we're korach, we make a sandwich, zekel and mikdash kehillel, because that's what Hillel did in the time of the temple. Okay, so those are the shiurim. The matzah should fill up this box here, where it says matzah nafikomen. That's the shear of eating matzah. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Not time. How long is
And one has just a few moments. One should eat the matzah within a few moments. Right? You shouldn't just drag it out. One should eat the matzah within a few moments.
How many times do you eat matzah?
So you eat matzah when you first start, right? So when you first wash your hands,
This amount.
right? That amount.
That amount.
Then you take the matzah and you make the korach, the korech, the sandwich. There you don't have to have as much. There it's a smaller amount.
The
non-cream, not the other kind, the normal kind of matzah, so that's what's in
No, you really shouldn't. You should really use the shmura. I told you, if you have a problem, though, if you have a problem with the hand shmur matzah because it's harder, I tell you, this really is not that much because the shmur matzah is actually very, very thin.
See, nobody at my Seder is going to eat that matzah.
Right.
Except
You.
maybe me, possibly him.
I would suggest if it's really a problem,
It's tough.
then
You don't carry a gene for that matzah.
there's a specific
We're not FFBs, so we don't.
there's a specific enzyme that you can learn to secrete that takes care of these matzahs. That's right. Again, I would suggest that if you have a problem with the hand shmura, the machine shmura, the boxes, and that's available at Spitzer's and Bornstein's also. But the machine shmura matzah is just very much like the regular matzah, right? And really tastes the same. So you have a problem, as long as it's shmura, then you could use it for the seder. Okay. One should read the Haggadah b'simcha. One is obligated to read the Haggadah in a meaningful way, with joy. And as I said, if you can't read it all in Hebrew, then you should read parts of it in English, especially the parts that are more descriptive. And especially when you get to the part of the Haggadah that right before the meal describes the Seder plate. There we point out the different parts. We point out the matzah, the marar, we point out the zroa. Now with each one of these things, with each one of the things that we point out on the Seder plate, you should actually lift it up and show the bitter herbs, the matzah. When it comes, however, to the zroa, to the shank bone, the roasted shank bone that's on your Seder plate, you don't lift that up. The reason that we don't is we don't want to give any indication that we're having and participating in the Paschal sacrifice, because we no longer have the temple. And since we no longer have the temple, we have to clearly indicate that we're not involved in the Paschal service, in the Paschal sacrifice. So we don't point it out as we do to the others. That's also the reason one should not have roasted meat for the Seder. One should not have roasted meat because, at least there's a custom not to have roasted meat, because the sacrifice was roasted. And at the time of the temple, the sacrifice was eaten with the matzah all together. That's one of the reasons for the sandwich, because at the time of the temple, they had the matzah, they had the bitter herbs, and they had the lamb all together.
Should you not use lamb, even if you're going to make a stew?
If you're making a stew, it doesn't matter what you make. If you're making a stew, it doesn't look like roasted lamb. But certainly to put it on the spit, and to go around like that you can't do. We discussed the dynamics of the matzah and the wine. Whenever you're lifting up the wine, like during Kiddush, or where specific praises to God in the Seder, like Lefichach, therefore we're obligated to praise God. You'll see a footnote that says lift up the cup. Whenever you're obligated to lift up the cup, then you cover the matzah. There's almost a dynamic taking place. Redemption and freedom, freedom and redemption, suffering and redemption, suffering and joy, combine one with the other.
What stand up when you say Lefichach?
One there, during Hallel, there are some people who have the custom to stand up.
When you do stand up.
Right. Some people do have the custom. Right. And it should be said in a loud voice. And again, it's most important that you make the Seder as joyous as possible. It's most important that people understand that the Seder is relevant to us. It's most important, I know that my father-in-law, Hashem, is no longer with us, but my mother-in-law got out of Germany already in the 40s, right before, like, everyone says they got the last boat out, those people who were Zelka to get out. I don't know what that means, but it's important for people who had some taste of suffering, to be able to express that they know what it's like. They know what slavery is like. They know what suffering is like. One of the difficulties that we have growing up here in this country is that it's hard to picture. For me, that was very refreshing in a certain way, going to the Soviet Union. But it's very hard to picture for us what we have, because we don't know what it's like not to have. And therefore, to understand that the Seder gives us an opportunity to remember what was, in order to foresee, to highlight what can be, if we would focus our attentions on Geula Shlema. When we make the motzi, remember what we did in the beginning of the Seder? We broke the matzahs, right? We did the yachats. And what did we do? We left the middle matzah broken, right? So there are 3 matzot sitting in front of you. When it comes to the motzi, this is what you do. Let's say you have these 3 matzot. Here's one matzah. This is actually very good material to use because they basically taste the same. Here's one matzah. Here's
colorful.
Thank you. Here's another matzah, and here's your broken matzah. Okay? When it's time to make the motzi, you've washed your hands. Now you've made the bracha at the end, al netilat yadayim, right? This is right before the meal. Then you lift up all 3 matzot, and you make the bracha of hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Got that? You take all of the matzot that you now have. Remember, the afikomen, the half of this that's broken, is hiding someplace. Okay? Where it's hiding, I can't tell you. That's up to your own. That's a rough meaning, isn't it? Okay. So you take the 3 matzot in hand, hold it with all of your 10 fingers, right? And make the bracha of hamotzi lechem min haaretz. By the way, when we make the bracha hamotzi lechem min haaretz, the custom is to lift up the matzah or the bread. Not that you should use the bread at the Seder, right? But I mean, on Shabbat, anytime you make hamotzi, when you say hamotzi lechem, you should lift up the lechem, lift up the bread. You take all 3 of the matzot and lift it up and say hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Then you drop the bottom matzah and place the broken matzah on top. And then make the bracha of al achilat asher kishon mitzvah v'tzivanu. God commanded us with His commandments and commanded us on the eating of matzah. The first bracha was the bracha on the matzah as food, and therefore the bracha for the whole meal, hamotzi. The second bracha, so that's why it's made like this, because there's a halacha by Shabbat and Yom Tov to have at least 2 full loaves, what we call lechem mishnah. So we have the lechem mishnah, and we have the 2 full rolls for the hamotzi, or matzahs for the hamotzi. Then you take the middle matzah, place it on top of the top matzah, which now becomes the bottom matzah. The last matzah, the bottom matzah is discarded, is put down. And then you make the bracha on the mitzvah of matzah, al achilat matzah. And the reason for that is because the matzah represents that which is broken, represents slavery, represents hardship. And therefore the broken matzah comes into play in a more profound way and is put up in top, and therefore that's the order of making the brachas on the matzah. You got the dynamic of that. Then after that, it's time for the maror, for the bitter herbs. And that's the...
You eat it, right?
Yeah, of course. Then you eat a kazayit. You should take part of this and part of that and give it out to everybody, and then again supplement with whatever other matzahs are around. But don't eat from the bottom matzah yet. This matzah you'll save for later on.
First you eat the one that mevarer, so eat the kezayit v'nafter u'mechalek, or you will let
No, you eat a kazayit. You eat a kazayit of, again, you make the bracha of hamotzi. Got this? Make the bracha of hamotzi, put this down, and then you make al achilat matzah. Then you break from the small piece, and you break from this piece, and you give out to everyone present. Okay?
All right, question.
Yeah.
The middle matzah that you broke previously.
Right, remember that's in the beginning of the Seder. We discussed that last week, the yakat.
All right, that, the one that is broken, the bigger piece is the afikomen.
Correct.
Broken piece,
right.
Which you hide. And the remaining piece is what you pass around.
Correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
All right. Now, the tough matzah,
Right.
or underneath the broken one,
Right.
you also pass that around.
No, right? Again, here are your three matzahs, right? You make a motzi lechem and aretz. 1, 2, 3, right? Top, middle, bottom. You make hamotzi lechem. Also very much a dialectic. There are two separate themes, even in the charoses. What does the charoses represent? Mortar. Remember the mortar of the bricks. But it's sweet. And we take the bitter herbs and we dip it into it. And then, you can see many people, if they don't know what they're doing in a Seder, will take the bitter herbs, scoop it up, they're hungry by now, they take the and they scoop it up, like with the old-fashioned romaine lettuce ice cream scoopers, and you just scoop it up, and they want to eat the whole thing. You're not supposed to do that. So it's dip it in the charoses, and then shake the charoses off. So you have a hint of taste. You have a hint of taste of the sweetness. It's a very important thing. I mean, just philosophically, it doesn't matter that much, but you don't dull the taste of the bitterness. In other words, the sweetness is a statement of what was. There's still the hint of that taste. If you remember, and this is also a nice thing to tell people. It's a nice little tidbit if you want to tell them a footnote explain to them what you're doing. It's a nice thing to mention at the Seder. The Jewish people have tasted redemption. We've tasted living in our own land with our own temple. And all we have now is an aftertaste of that prepares us for what will be. Just like, if going back to Adam Arishon, if you think about how often this theme is repeated throughout the Bible. Just like by Adam Arishon, we tasted paradise. We were there only for one day. But all you've got is that aftertaste of it, which gives us the desire to recapture it, to search for it, as we've expressed that theme beforehand. During the meal, now the meal, of course, you're not yotze, you don't fulfill the Seder, unless you have gefilte fish, unless you have chicken soup with a knedel in it. That's very important, matzah balls. That's it. The truth of the matter is, the meal of the Seder is part of the mitzvah. But it's also important not to stuff yourself, because you have to have the afikomen afterwards. And the matzah is more of an important aspect of the mitzvah. But the meal is a part of the mitzvah, and one should use the meal not just to talk about how you're doing in business and how you're doing at work, and to hear that Aunt Sadie got a new car, she smashed the motorcycle, and that type of stuff. That's not the purpose. Again, if you have guests that aren't familiar or not intimate with the religious experience, so then you have to do the best you can.
Is fish required?
No.
Because you never have.
No, it's not. It's not. But I was just joking about that. But the meal itself, does it say the fish there?
No, it's just...
Oh, that's your checklist for Tessa. The meal, throughout the Seder, one's attention should not be diverted. In other words, it really should be a reenactment. It really should be exciting. It really should show the sense of simcha, the sense of joy that you have, because God promised us, hey, I redeemed you once. If you look for me, if you search for me, if it's meaningful to you, I can redeem you again. It's up to you to define how close we're going to be in this relationship. So if you make it something worthwhile, if you make it meaningful, then it will be meaningful. Again, when you have guests who are insensitive to it, you have to explain as much as possible. Of course, there's always the point where they said, it's 10 o'clock. Aren't we eating yet? And then you have to, it's always important, by the way, to let guests know beforehand approximately what time they'll be eating. Giving them the option to, prepare themselves first by coming in stone drunk, or on wine, or at least not hungry and anticipating to have a quick meal and get home. If you have people who are not used to a religious Seder, you should tell them that it's an experience, and that you're doing the best you can to tie in. I'll tell you, one theme to me is very, very meaningful, and I mention this all the time, and I'm going to speak about it in Shabbos HaGadol as well. You know that when you're making Kiddush that night, most of the Jews all over the world at that night are making Kiddush also at the Seder. So something ties us all into each other. And you know that your Seder, the way you've had it, ties into a Seder which was had by generations from generations, all the way back to the time that we left Mitzrayim. When you think about that, when you think about tying into that, becoming a part of it, it gives an extra edge of meaning. Because you can't talk about the future without tying into the past and tying into the community. So to put it all together, the Seder should be a joyous, meaningful experience of searching and learning and looking for Hashem. And trying to really look into the Haggadah. And again, you can't do it all if you haven't done preparation. You have to do your homework. You have to go through the Haggadah, read through the parts. We've done a basic outline. Tomorrow night I'll go further in our discussion of the philosophy of the Haggadah, which is very important. It also gives you more things to say at the Seder. Give you a few more tidbits which could be interesting for you to say over at the Seder. But again, bearing in mind the needs of the children and the family and yourself, it should be an exciting and joyous occasion that should not only be memorable, but give us the ability to really reach out and find that geula, that redemption from Hashem. Any questions on some of what we did? Was we went through basic outline of the laws. So as we dip out of the glass of wine, the goblet of wine that we use, we dip out of that onto a side plate. So the Sfardim have a custom of using a broken cup, a broken glass. You dip it from the goblet of wine, the Kiddush cup, and you dip it into some place. So we just usually just throw it on the side of the plate, the plate underneath the cup. And we pull it out with our pinky, and that's when we say, when we do the mention of the Makot, Dam va'esh v'timrot Hashem, about the blood and the fire and the firing furnace, and then we do the Tetzach Hadash B'Achav, and individual, when we mention the Makot. Any time we mention the plagues, and that counting in the middle of the Haggadah, and tomorrow night I'll show you the Haggadah itself, and we'll try to understand why the name games are played with the Tetzach Hadash B'Achav. And if you don't understand what I'm talking about now, we'll do it tomorrow night in greater detail. But we pour out some of the wine, and you should explain to the people, is because when we go and discuss a plague or an enemy hurting, so even the failure and the destruction of our enemies is a cause of sorrow for the Jewish people. We don't want to see our enemies die. We want to see sin. We want to see them die of being our enemies, but not our enemies dying.
We have a minhag, and also if it's aleratic, we have a minhag that we take 2 dli, 1 dli of water, a cup of wine, 10 stones, and every makkah we throw into the water and we pour the water. Yeah, not everyone take and drink.
There are different minhagim. There are many different minhagim. The Sfardim has some very colorful ones, very interesting ones. Okay, any other questions? One per family.